In the summer of 1974, in the quiet town of Blackwood, Maine, there was a story that was never told. It was the story of Ellie Hastings, a 19-year-old girl who vanished without a trace in the brief window from 7:40 p.m. to 8:15 p.m. Her gold Chevrolet Nova was left abandoned beside Maple Creek Bridge, keys still in the ignition. But Ellie had disappeared into the night. Sheriff Arthur Jensen initially treated it as a voluntary runaway case, but her mother, Martha Hastings, always knew her daughter had not left on her own. The only evidence that remained was the muddy footprints around the car and the statement from a witness at Liberty gas station about a tall man wearing a blue shirt for 48 years. The case lay buried in the police basement, nothing more than an old cardboard box labeled number 70 for Hastings. What happened in those fateful 25 minutes, and why was a respected man, Reverend Charles Finch of St. Mark's Chapel, the only person present at the scene before the police even arrived? Let us uncover the horrifying secret that was hidden for half a century, finally decoded thanks to an old strand of hair, a trembling 8mm film, and the persistence of Agent Peter Vance of the New England Cold Case Unit. Justice may sleep, but it never dies. The cold Coca-Cola can, still unopened, rolled gently one full turn across the car floor before coming to rest beside the passenger seat, as if the last hand that touched it had been snatched from this world in an instant. The faint streetlight of August 1974 reflected dimly on the gold paint of the Chevrolet Nova parked quickly near the edge of Maple Creek Bridge, leaving behind a thick, inexplicable silence. One witness stated, "I saw her at 7:40, then fell abruptly silent in the middle of his statement, as though there was something he dared not finish saying." Route 95 that night held no other sound except the thin whisper of wind drifting over the water beneath the bridge. And Ellie Hastings vanished right in the midst of that stillness. She left needle and thread tailoring at 7:40 p.m., her usual night shift, still carrying the familiar look of a 19-year-old girl who simply wanted to get home after a long day. Who could have imagined that the footsteps leaving the shop door would be her last trace? At Liberty gas station, the night shift clerk remembered Ellie's voice, clearly slightly hurried, but still polite, when she bought a cold Coca-Cola can and said she was heading home for dinner with her mother. That sentence remains intact in the file. In quotation marks, going home for dinner with mom. It was also the last recorded words, because just minutes later, the gold Nova pulled out of the gas station, its taillights fading along Route 95 until they disappeared entirely into the darkness ahead. The distance from there to Maple Creek Bridge was not far. But what happened on that short stretch? Or was it merely a shadow passing by that knocked everything off its normal course? The car was found parked quickly, not in a hurried way, nor neatly. It sat at an odd angle, as if the driver had been distracted in the final second. Did she notice something before stepping out? When the investigation team approached, they noted the metallic smell of the bridge railing, the damp rising from the water below, and above all, the absolute silence that enveloped the area. That silence was like a burial shroud draped over the scene, making anyone standing nearby feel as though time had frozen at the girl's last moment. There were no signs of struggle, no fleeing footprints, no scattered belongings except the unopened Coca-Cola can. The can was still so cold that condensation clung to its surface, as if proving Ellie had left the car only minutes before she vanished. That chill made many in the team pause when they touched it, and someone whispered, "Did she know she was about to disappear?" That question has remained unanswered for years. At first, local authorities concluded that Ellie Hastings might have left voluntarily. No signs of crime, no clear evidence, no recorded cry for help that night. But why would a girl on her way home to have dinner with her mother simply disappear midway? Martha Hastings, Ellie's mother, immediately rejected that conclusion. In the file, she is quoted briefly, "My girl didn't leave me." Her voice was described as calm, but colder than the night air in Blackwood, as if everything she said was absolutely certain. She was the only one who never wavered in believing Ellie had met with something unusual. A mother senses things in a way that investigation files cannot capture in words. The detail of the gold Nova parked quickly on the bridge became the center of every speculation. It said nothing, yet it stood there like a mute witness, raising a series of questions. Who made her stop? Or did Ellie herself stop because of something only she could see? How long had he been there before it happened if there really was a he? No one knew, and the silence of the scene only deepened the shadow surrounding the case. The temperature that night was recorded as below average, making the breath of those inspecting the car visible in the flashlight beams. Each footstep they took on the road sounded disjointed, as if even the pavement didn't want its unnatural quiet broken. And inside the car, under the pale light, everything belonging to Ellie was neatly arranged, with no sign of panic. Did she step out of the car calmly? Or was that calm merely a mask over a moment too quick for fear to leave a mark? The water under the bridge flowed slowly, the damp smell rising cold enough to raise goosebumps, and according to records, no unusual objects floated beneath the bridge that night. Everything was unnaturally clean. 28 years. Who still remembers those tiny details? This is the complete set of facts in the disappearance case. There is nothing more, nothing less. A 19-year-old girl left the tailor shop, but a Coca-Cola can, drove her Nova home, passed along the familiar Route 95, and vanished in a patch of darkness lasting less than 2 minutes. The case file closed in a cold records room, and the gold Nova keeps appearing on every page like a reminder no one wants to hear. In the end, the silence of Maple Creek Bridge remains colder than any statement ever recorded. Just before 5 a.m., the telephone in the Hastings house rang through the thick silence of the town, its harsh sound slicing the still undissipated night in two. And from that moment everything began to veer off its normal course. Martha Hastings called at 5:12, her voice trembling slightly as she reported to the Cumberland County Sheriff that her daughter had not come home. The wall clock in the call log was described as ticking steadily to the point of irritation, as if each tick measured Ellie's disappearance. A faint streak of light from the window fell across the headboard when Sheriff Arthur Jensen arrived at the Hastings residence, and he began asking the first questions. The air in the room carried the damp smell of early mist mixed with the chill of wearing a combination I still haven't forgotten years later. Jensen carefully examined Ellie's daily routine, every detail recorded in firm, concise handwriting, then borrowed her graduation photo, the one in the file simply captioned, "Photo taken in 1973, hair tied neatly, slight smile." That photo felt both distant and close, making anyone who looked at it wonder where the girl in the picture had gone amid the darkness of Blackwood. As dawn barely broke, Jensen organized a rapid response team. The cold metal of early daylight glinted on the search map spread across the hood of the patrol car. Red circled points included Liberty Gas Station, St. Mark's Chapel, Route 95, and Maple Creek Bridge. Was any clue overlooked at those locations? The search teams left the station at 7:15 a.m., engines roaring in unison and stretching out like a broken ribbon along the misty road. Each group moved along Route 95, their footsteps swallowed by the weak wind through the trees. Someone recorded that in that moment, they could hear their own breathing labored and tinged with dread. Meanwhile, Jensen and Sergeant Daniel O'Connell questioned shops along the road. Dim light fell across the old wooden counter at Liberty Gas Station when they met night shift clerk Ethan Miller. Miller looked at Ellie's photo and said, "She came in around 8. Then his eyes drifted slightly as if reliving the memory of a few hours earlier. Miller clearly remembered Ellie buying a cold Coca-Cola and, as she left, seeing a tall man in a navy blue shirt standing near her car. Who was that man? In the file, Miller's statement reads, "She gave a slight smile. Then both of them headed toward the bridge." That sentence, only a few words, left a dark void that stretched across years. What made Ellie smile at a stranger so late in the evening? When this information entered the preliminary report, Jensen made no comment, but his note beneath the interview summary was chilling. Unidentified. Meanwhile, search teams expanded their sweep near Maple Creek Bridge by noon. The water beneath the bridge reflected pale sunlight, but there was not the slightest trace. The silence in that area made anyone nearby feel as though they were hearing a sound with its final note cut off. By afternoon, Sergeant O'Connell reported another detail. 2 farmers working nearby said they had seen a yellow car's lights stop near the bridge the night before, but hadn't paid attention. Why hadn't they paid attention? In missing persons cases, sometimes casual indifference becomes the most haunting thing. The farmers simply said it was a car's light stopped for a few minutes, then went out. Nothing more. They heard no screams, saw no unusual movement, and couldn't make out who was in the car. But was that very moment the key that was missed? O'Connell recorded their statements in slightly slanted handwriting, and I still remember the report describing the interview room smelling of dry hay mixed with the thick sweat of 2 men fresh from the fields. That combination made the room feel hot, yet couldn't dispel the creeping chill when they mentioned the yellow car. From early morning to late afternoon, no team found any trace of Ellie along Route 95. The wind grew stronger on the bridge as evening approached, carrying vague whispers that no one could distinguish as rustling leaves or the echo of an unspoken secret. All the gathered facts pointed to one thing. Ellie had been near Maple Creek Bridge the previous night, and someone had been with her. The remaining question, colder than any night in Blackwood, was why she never came home on the second morning. Fog blanketed Maple Creek like a wet cloth drawn across the ground, swallowing every movement and leaving a chill that slipped inside collars. Around 7:15, a firefighter reported a car parked quickly about 200 yards from Maple Creek Bridge. When we arrived, the gold Chevrolet Nova emerged faintly through the thick mist, its rear wheels sunk deep into the wet earth, as if it had stood there for a long time. The driver's door was slightly ajar. The window rolled halfway down. Key still in the ignition, everything gave the impression that whoever had been inside had simply stepped out and dissolved into the fog. Inside the car lingered the smell of damp fabric and cold air. On the passenger seat was a canvas bag containing a wallet, loose change, a notebook, and the unopened Coca-Cola can that Ethan Miller confirmed Ellie had bought at 8 o'clock. The driver's seat was pushed back and the steering wheel slightly turned, a detail that made O'Connell conclude bluntly in the report. Appears she stopped voluntarily. But how voluntary? Jensen examined the mud around the car and discovered 2 sets of footprints. One small, possibly female. One larger, clearly male. The smell of mud mixed with rotting leaves at the scene was so heavy, caught in the throat. And in that moment I wondered if someone had stood beside this car in the dark without uttering a word. Jerry Maynard, the youngest on the team, took several Polaroids, but the morning light was too scattered, making the images on the film look half washed away. Still, there were no signs of struggle or blood, and it was precisely the car's absolute silence that made everything more eerie. How long had he been standing there? That afternoon, when Sheriff Jensen returned with technicians to collect evidence, the scene had already been compromised. Curious onlookers had trampled the mud. Fire trucks left overlapping tire tracks, and every fragile trace was rolled into irreparable chaos. The file simply noted, evidence no longer intact, As a result, the Nova had to be towed to the garage behind Cumberland County Station, where the air was thick with the smell of motor oil and old metal scent that easily brought to mind the hopelessness of a case slowly going cold. Maynard and O'Connell began inspecting the car late that afternoon. On the rear floor mat was a large-size 10 male shoe print impressed into dried red mud that had cracked into patches. They had no measuring tape, no proper evidence collection kit. How much evidence slipped away simply because of missing tools? When Jensen requested mud samples be sent to Boston Forensics Lab, O'Connell replied in the file, "No specimen containers. Transport budget exhausted." That sentence was underlined in blue ink in the internal report, like a small but persistent cut into the investigation. Or did everything stall because of a budget line? In the back seat they found a white fabric scrap mixed with dried mud, possibly from Ellie Hastings' dress. With no evidence bag available, O'Connell wrapped it in a scrap of memo paper so thin that the slightest moisture could wrinkle it. Things like that make you wonder if a crucial clue lay right there, only to be tied up in makeshift fashion. The rustle of paper in the examination room was loud enough to blend with the heavy breathing of all three men, and no one spoke another word. Did they feel something slipping from their grasp? Outside, the last light of day streamed through the narrow window, casting a pale gold streak across the concrete floor, marking the time when the truth continued to sink deeper. None of us found an explanation for the mingled footprints, the ajar door, the intact Coca-Cola can, or the trampled mud. Everything seemed reduced to scattered fragments that could not be pieced together. And perhaps it was from that moment that we understood Ellie Hastings had left this life in a way no one in Blackwood had seen coming. The gold Nova sat motionless in the temporary storage shed, the dried mud on its undercarriage cracking into small flakes, like the last remnants of a night no one had witnessed. That afternoon, under Sheriff Jensen's orders, the car was sealed and pushed deep into a corner of the shed, where the weak neon light flickered, making everything look coated in a layer of neglect. 2 days later, Martha Hastings came to see the car, standing for a long time in front of the driver's door without saying a word. Her breathing seemed to linger with the cold metallic scent that hadn't yet faded. Just minutes after she left, Jensen ordered the car returned to the family because there was no more storage space, and Boston Forensics Lab refused samples without an official criminal case. Did that sever everything right there? The file simply recorded, "Vehicle returned to owner." No evidence of crime. And as the Nova was towed away, dried mud fell onto the road with faint crackling sounds beneath the tow truck's tires. In the office, Jensen sat alone at the wooden desk, writing the final report in firm handwriting. No signs of struggle. Possible voluntary disappearance. Those words sounded like a door closing that no one dared to reopen. But for days, after the car was found, Jensen reopened the file and began the first round of interviews, as if something still clung to the silence. The first was Ethan Miller, the night shift clerk at Liberty Gas Station, the last person to see Ellie Hastings standing firmly under the station lights. Ethan confirmed Ellie bought a Coca-Cola at 7:50 p.m. and that he saw a tall man. Dark hair, navy blue shirt with a white paint streak on the collar standing near the payphone. That detail was repeated slowly in the report. Ethan also remembered Ellie giving the man a slight smile before leaving. Was that smile cautious, or just an unconscious moment? No one knew. That same afternoon, Jensen and O'Connell visited Needle and Thread Tailoring to check Ellie's schedule. Manager Olivia Vance said Ellie left at 7:40 p.m., mentioning she would go home early for dinner. The light in the shop at that moment must have carried the smell of new fabric and the heat from the iron a familiar atmosphere hard to believe, was followed only minutes later by Ellie appearing under the cold lights of the gas station. That evening, Jensen summoned Ellie's ex-boyfriend, James Donovan, 22, a student at Pine Ridge College. James answered clearly that they had broken up for months earlier with no conflict. He provided an alibi, working at the library until 10:30 p.m., but could such a clean alibi truly erase the quiet suspicions in the investigators' minds? No one said it aloud, yet the silence after James's statement spoke for itself. Jensen recorded the information with an even stroke of the pen showing neither trust nor doubt, just another line continuing through the file like every other detail. Did she know she was about to vanish from that night? The questions fell into the darkness between the interrogation room's walls, where the slowly turning ceiling fan made a faint scraping sound like fingernails lightly brushing the tabletop. At times, I wondered whether the slight smile Ellie gave the man in the navy blue shirt was her final signal to the world. Or was it merely a passing shadow, a moment no one managed to hold on to? No new evidence, no clear leads, only the smell of old files and the steady tap of pen on paper in the interrogation room, as if even Jensen could hear the emptiness growing. And, like so many other nights during the investigation, everything dissolved again into silence at the end of the hallway, where the light cast down on the cold tile floor made every footprint look half erased. In the end, all that remained was the harsh truth rewritten on paper. Ellie Hastings' disappearance slipped from our hands not with screams, but with the absolute silence of tiny details no one could hold on to. The wind whistling through the old meeting room window made the edges of the files on the table tremble, and precisely when the clock struck 6:12 a.m. that day, Reverend Charles Finch's name first appeared in the report, like a thin thread pulling open another dark corner of the Ellie Hastings disappearance. The embroidered handkerchief marked DH lay in the sealed evidence bag, its thin fabric carrying the scent of damp earth and hardened river mud still clinging along the edges. During the afternoon internal meeting, someone started to say he, but the sentence was cut off by the screech of a chair, so cold it felt as though the floor was drawing heat from the entire room. For days after the Nova was found, Reverend Finch's shadow began to fall across every page of the file like a strange, inexplicable mist, and the question kept hovering in my mind. How long had he been there before the search team arrived? In those days, Ellie's friends in the church choir spoke of Finch with a mix of wariness and respect. They said he showed special attention to her, though no one dared to define what special meant. The scent of old wood from St. Mark's Chapel still clung to Ellie's hair when she appeared for the last time at needle and thread tailoring, and people who knew both said they had seen Finch talking with her a week before everything happened. Did that conversation contain something no one remembers clearly? Or was it just a memory worn away by time? In O'Connell's report, he wrote plainly, Finch volunteered with the search team, and it was he who found the handkerchief embroidered, with EH near the riverbank, not far from where the car was discovered. Why such a coincidence? A pastor, a prior meeting, and a piece of evidence lying in a deserted spot as if waiting. Sheriff Jensen requested Finch come to the station. No one knows if he hesitated, only that he arrived on time, shoes polished, white shirt pressed crisp, silver hair neatly combed, holding a small Bible like a spiritual armor. When he stepped into the interrogation room, the door closed with an oddly soft click, so gentle it seemed to press the air downward, leaving only the sound of each person's breathing audible in the prolonged silence. I still remember Jensen writing in the report, Finch's eyes when he sat down were so clear they were almost translucent, yet they held a faint dark halo at the corners, like dust that hadn't been brushed away. He gave a slight smile, a calm kind that was impossible to read as confidence or defense. And when Jensen asked about the night Ellie disappeared, Finch simply said, "I was at home." Short, clean, without the slightest crack for emotion to slip through. That answer sounded smooth, as if he had rehearsed it countless times before stepping through the interrogation room door. Jensen placed the search team's Polaroid on the table, the photo glinting under the flickering fluorescent light, then asked about the handkerchief. Finch confirmed immediately, without hesitation, "I'm the one who found it, near the river bank." But Jensen knew the photo had been taken right at the scene, and the timestamp showed Finch had been there at least 20 minutes before the police. 20 minutes in that thick afternoon fog. What was that gap? What had he done in that gap? Or did he simply have a habit of arriving early, a very timely habit? I clearly recall the sound of Jensen's pen touching the paper as he wrote his notes, slowly, each stroke ice cold, neither confirming nor denying, only doubting. The smell of fresh ink mingled with the air, dissolving into the chill from the window, sinking the entire room into a feeling impossible to separate into intuition or suspicion. When Finch left, his footsteps on the hallway sounded so dry they were like stones scraping across the concrete floor. Deputy Rob Hayes stood by the door, watching the man's shadow slide around the corner and disappear. Rob told Jensen that there was something off in his eyes, as though Finch was trying to hide a truth he still believed himself innocent of. It was a comment that couldn't be entered into the official file, yet it sank deeper than any legal document. Could Rob's gut feeling be trusted? Or was it just a shadow cast by the hallway's last light? I thought about that question many times, especially on nights when the old file pages still carried the damp smell of time, a sticky film left on the fingertips. When Jensen finished the interview report, he had no choice but to conclude, no compelling evidence. Subject cooperative. The words were curt to the point of cruelty, like a final period on any hope of uncovering something clear from the elderly pastor. And the very moment Jensen signed the last page, his hand trembled slightly, the pen tilted, the ink smeared faintly. I wondered whether he truly believed that conclusion. Or was he forced to believe it because there were no more leads to cling to? In the interrogation room, the cold white light of the desk lamp gradually dimmed, leaving behind the warm smell of electrical wire and a faint crackling sound like the last breath of an old device struggling to stay alive. In the end, the case was temporarily closed with those faded lines in the file, and the silence that followed echoed longer than any of the interviews that had come before. No emotion, no conclusion, just the void where Reverend Finch's name sat in the list of witnesses, neither advancing to suspect nor retreating to the innocent. That boundary was so thin that a single breath of wind could erase it, but no one ever blew it away. The file was returned to the steel cabinet, the lock clicking shut with a short, sharp sound, and from that moment, the disappearance of Ellie Hastings slipped into a silent darkness, as though no one had ever vanished that night. The metallic clack of file clips striking each other at 6:15 a.m. that morning rang dry and hollow in the empty room, marking 3 weeks since the Hastings case had fallen into complete stasis. A thin layer of dust covered the file folder, as if time itself had declared the conclusion before the investigative team could. The line "No new leads. Continue monitoring" from the state office sat alone on the page, cold and final like a pre-printed verdict. The desk lamp's light sliced a sharp line across the old documents, exposing the bare truth that the team's efforts had hit a ceiling. And in that silence, I wondered whether any detail had slipped through our fingers without anyone noticing. 3 weeks after the novel was found, the Hastings case had not advanced a single step. Any report sent up came back with the same curt, repetitive reply that grew infuriating. No new leads. Continue monitoring. Each time Jensen received it, he simply folded the paper, set it down on the desk, but the way he drew a breath through clenched teeth said more than any complaint ever could. The smell of cold coffee mingled with the scent of old paper and faint spreading ink in the room, a reminder of the stagnation slowly swallowing what little hope remained. In the hallway, the footsteps of passing officers grew sparser, as if everyone already knew this disappearance would lead nowhere. Had they all given up long ago? Sheriff Jensen faced pressure from a limited budget, and in a missing person case with no body, no blood, no sign of crime whatsoever, priority was always pushed to the bottom. One afternoon during the weekly meeting, the administrative chief glanced at the half-hand thick stack of files and pronounced it like reading a familiar formula. 3 weeks. No body. No signs of crime. Don't drag this out. Those words landed on the table like a cold, heavy object, so weighty that the entire room fell completely silent. Did anyone in that room truly believe the girl had simply vanished in a harmless way? Or were they all going along with the machine because there was no other choice? That evening, Jensen reluctantly signed the final report. He wrote slowly, each letter forced out of the pen tip. No suspicion of criminal activity, a conclusion that closed the entire initial effort, wiping away every fragile lead that had ever flickered even his own never-fading suspicion about Reverend Finch. I clearly remember the lamplight reflecting off the paper, highlighting the underline Jensen placed beneath that final line, trembling slightly the moment he set the pen down. Did she know she was about to be forgotten? The next day, the case file was officially classified as missing person. The red stamp came down, dry and without hesitation. Jensen personally carried the remaining evidence to the storage room, the embroidered handkerchief marked A, 6 faded Polaroids, and an 11-page handwritten report with numerous pencil notations. Everything went into a plain brown cardboard box, its edges already worn. He labeled it, Number 70 for Hastings, missing person, a simple line, yet heavier than any official declaration. In the dim light of the ground floor hallway, the evidence box looked impossibly small, as if Ellie's entire disappearance had been compressed into something anyone could pick up with one hand. What tormented Jensen most was not the lack of leads, but Reverend Finch's words during the interview. I found it at the water's edge, as though someone placed it there to be found. That sentence echoed in his mind countless times, as though someone placed it there. Who would want a clue to be found, and why? Or was it merely Finch's way of explaining an inexplicable coincidence about his timing? Jensen once wrote a small marginal note, almost unconsciously. What does he know? But even that note could not be included in the official report. At the end of the month, Jensen carried box number 70 for Hastings down to the basement. The storage basement always carried the heavy smell of rotting paper and cold metal. The dim fluorescent tubes created scattered shadows across the floor. Each footstep echoed softly, but deeply, like reverberations from cases that were never solved. He placed the box on the third shelf on the left, a spot neither too high nor too low, just right to be forgotten over time. How long had he stood there before realizing what he had lost? I don't know who that question was for Finch, Jensen himself, or Ellie. When he left the basement, his shadow blended into the weak hallway light, leaving behind only a silent brown box among hundreds of others. And from that moment, Eleanor Hastings was forgotten in the reports of Cumberland County, gradually slipping into a void that no one was forced to care about anymore. Every sound, every story, every suspicion that had once surrounded the case dissolved like cold breath touching stone and vanishing. In the end, silence won. And when silence wins, no one hears anything anymore. The white handkerchief lay still in the evidence box. Its edges yellowed, but the letters EH still clearly visible under the flashlight beam. That was the first thing Agent Peter Vance saw on the morning of March 2022, when he reopened box number 70 for Hastings. Forgotten for nearly half a century in the basement of the Cumberland County Sheriff's Office, the damp air of the storage room clung to his collar. The smell of rotting paper and old metal made each breath heavy, as though the room itself remembered the disappearance well. In that moment, the dry snap of the box lid opening echoed in the silent space, sounding like the reopening of an old scar. Was there anything in this box that should have been noticed back in 1974? And why did it have to wait until now to be touched again? Vance, 42, an investigator with the New England Cold Case Unit, had chosen this case without explaining why to anyone, only saying briefly, "I want to revisit Hastings." He found the box in the lowest corner of the shelf, where dust had settled thicker than anywhere else, as though no hand had touched it in decades. Inside, besides the white handkerchief, were 6 faded Polaroids, Sheriff Jensen's handwritten report, and a small plastic bag containing a 7-centimeter strand of brown hair still stuck with dried mud, remarkably intact. How long had he stood there before leaving it? Vance examined it with a magnifying glass, the flashlight beam catching the hair's core in a thin thread of light. Jensen's old report lay just beneath the evidence, bearing the familiar conclusion: no suspicion of criminal activity. The words were flat, emotionless, but Vance read them slowly, as if reading a mistake. That afternoon, he brought all the evidence to the Central Processing Lab. Dr. Sophia Reyes, the forensic analyst, held the hair up to the light, the beam making it glint a reddish brown. "If it hasn't degraded, we can extract DNA," she said, her voice calm but unable to hide intense focus. Next came the handkerchief. Dr. Reyes swabbed along the edge where the embroidered EH threads had frayed slightly. She explained that if epithelial cells remained, they might find male DNA. Low chance, but worth trying. Did she know she was about to disappear when she carried this handkerchief? Or was it handed to someone in the final moment, while waiting for Dr. Reyes to collect samples? Vance looked through the 6 Polaroids. One showed the 1974 search team, with a handwritten note at the bottom, "Volunteer Pastor RH." The writing trembled slightly, as if written in haste, but clear enough to trace. Reverend Charles Finch appeared in the records, pastor of St. Mark's Chapel, retired 1985, deceased 1992. Vance noted in black ink, "Finch was at the scene?" A short sentence that carried many possibilities. He paused for a moment, staring at the words, his mind echoing what Deputy Rob Hayes had written in 1974. There was something off in Pastor Finch's eyes. Why had Hayes written that on the very day of the investigation, when evidence was still unclear? Or had he seen something no one else noticed? Vance sent all the samples to the State Forensics Bureau in Providence for testing. On the drive back, the tires rolled over the quiet road with a long, steady sound, cold and indifferent, like a heartbeat without feeling. He thought of Jensen, who had carried box number 74 to the basement with his own hands. Did Jensen truly believe the conclusion, no suspicion of criminal activity? Or was he forced to write it? In the dimming afternoon light, Vance recalled a line from the old report, "Handkerchief found at the water's edge," and Finch's words, as though someone placed it there to be found. Who would want to place a clue in such an obvious spot? Or was it just the casual remark of a man no one could question anymore? A week later, the lab results came back. The handkerchief showed mixed skin cell traces, and crucially, Y chromosome DNA could be extracted, a hope the case had never had before. The brown hair strand was not only intact, but suitable for a full genetic profile. The lab's white lights reflected off the dried mud still clinging to the hair, as if reminding them where it had lain nearly half a century earlier. Was this hair from the last person who stood beside Ellie Hastings, or merely a trace left by someone passing by? Vance held the conclusion in his hand for a long time, his breathing slowing, as though listening to something moving in the past. When he closed the file, the paper rustled with a sharp, cold sound, and in that moment, the Hastings case, thought buried in the basement for 48 years, opened its eyes again. The dry snap of the mailbox opening on Tuesday morning marked the arrival of the DNA results on Agent Vance's desk, and he stood motionless, staring at the white envelope under the office cold fluorescent light. The numbers on the report stood out so sharply they almost glowed, and the smell of fresh paper mixed with faint chemicals made the room feel thick, as though the air itself was holding onto an uncomfortable truth. When the wall clock struck the 20th second since he opened the file, the space around him seemed to contract, silent enough to feel his own breath swallowed by the darkness. Had he already known what would appear inside? The results began with a simple statement: 2 DNA sources. The first was unremarkable, but the second male, carrying Y chromosome match 99.99987%, with a profile in the state database. Identity: Charles Finch, born 1948, resident of Black Pond Lane. The words stood alone on the page, emotionless yet heavy as metal dropping onto concrete. The report included a direct quote from Dr. Sophia Reyes. Male DNA present on the inner surface of the handkerchief. Not merely incidental contact, Vance only nodded, but a vague question flared in his mind. How long had he held it in his hand? Dr. Reyes' lab always smelled of ethanol and disinfectant, a cleanliness so sterile it felt cold. The white light swept across her face, highlighting the determination as she confirmed the finding. No mistake, prolonged contact. Her sentence was cut short by the soft hum of the centrifuge behind her, as though the room itself was holding its breath. Vance updated the file that same afternoon, writing Finch's name under suspect in strokes as hard as steel. The moment the pen touched paper sounded sharp enough to cut, was everything that had been hidden slowly coming to light. When he opened the old photo file, he used software to enlarge and adjust contrast on the single Polaroid showing Finch near the Nova in 1974. The originally blurry image sharpened bit by bit, as though darkness was being peeled away. He called image analyst Rachel Brooks at the New England Cold Case Unit. Her voice on the line was calm, but taut as a violin string. "I'll handle it, needs a few days." Vance replied only with a yes, but the office felt suddenly colder, as though the name Finch had drained the color from the air. On the third day, Brooks sent back digitally enhanced images using reflection reconstruction. When he opened them, a chill ran up the back of his neck. Was the morning light in the photo speaking for someone? In the photo, Finch stood at an angle, nearly touching the roof of the Nova. The light reflecting from his right wrist formed a thin metallic streak. A round watch, silver band. Vance knew that watch well. Finch, at 74, still wore it every day. "Scratch here," Brooks noted in the email, attaching an analysis confirming the small scratch on the watch in the photo matched the current one perfectly. In that moment, Vance paused and looked at the wall clock. How many years had passed? Had anything truly changed? Light analysis showed the photo was taken before 7 a.m. yet Sheriff Jensen's report clearly stated the first search team arrived at the scene at 8:15. A gap of more than an hour lay there, silent and heavy as an unsolved mystery. Why was Finch there so early? Why did he stand so close to the Nova that his shadow fell across it? Or was he simply passing by at the right moment, What kind of coincidence could feel this cold? Vance went to the local newspaper's archive room. The dark space smelled of old newsprint dust on his fingertips, and the dehumidifier hummed steadily like the slow heartbeat of an aging heart. Among hundreds of film rolls, he found the 35mm negatives from 1974. When the projector light flashed on, the nova appeared from a different angle bare, without barriers or police tape, and Finch, captured in a single frame, was pointing toward the river, his face tense. Where had she been at that moment? Software comparison of photo timing gave the final conclusion. The frame was taken between 6:40 and 6:50 a.m. 90 minutes before Jensen arrived. In the silent archive room, the question echoed in Vance's mind like a stone dropping into deep water. What had he seen? Vance reassembled the entire file, each sheet brushing against another with the dry sound of dead leaves, while the desk lamp illuminated the photos, making the watch in the image seem to glint once more. The case was no longer just cold numbers. It was a broken chain of silence stretching from 1974 to now, as though time itself was still waiting for someone to open the final door. And that door, no matter who opened it, would bring no warmth. The click of the light switch in the darkened meeting room sounded at 5:47 a.m., the exact moment Agent Vance began reconstructing the timeline of the night of August 19, 1974. The desk lamp cast its glow over the old file. The paper yellowed, edges curling as if tired of time. Outside the glass door, early mist crept along the long hallway, thick with the musty smell of a northeastern summer. The first document read, 7:40 p.m. Eleanor leaves needle and thread tailoring. Just one line, yet like the first nail driven into a door that had remained shut for half a century. Could anyone imagine what happened in the minutes that followed? The original record stated clearly, 7:52 p.m. Ethan Miller saw Ellie for the last time at Liberty gas station, holding a cold Coca-Cola can, saying she was going home for dinner with her mother. The smell of gasoline, the sliding glass door, the flickering neon lights, Miller recalled it all in his statement that year, brief but unmistakable. But from the gas station to the nova found beside Maple Creek Bridge, no one knew what had come between, and what had appeared in that patch of darkness. At St. Mark's Chapel, the 1974 file only noted one line, Monday choir rehearsal, 8/19, 6 o'clock to 7:30 p.m., led by Reverend Charles Finch. The paper carried no smell, no sound, yet the silence within that line made the room feel a degree colder. In his statement, Finch said, he left the church at 8 p.m. and went straight home, without stopping anywhere. The words stood verbatim in the record. But who could explain those 30 missing minutes? And where did those 30 minutes take him? Vance called Margaret Lowell, the choir director in 1974, now white-haired with a slightly trembling voice. She said, he left early, around 7:30, said there was an urgent matter outside town. The words rang out like an old wooden door being dragged across memory. What urgent matter happened exactly that night? Mrs. Lowell paused for a few seconds, then said she remembered nothing more. The break in her memory sounded as dry as a torn page from a file, and Vance understood he had just picked up the final piece, though the dust on it was too thick. Finch's departure time from the church, 7:30. Ellie's departure time from the gas station, 7:52. The distance between the 2 points was only 5 miles, a straight road, taking 10 to 12 minutes. If Finch got into his car immediately upon leaving the church, he would have been near Liberty gas station around 7:42 or 7:45. At that moment, Ellie was standing at the cooler counter, opening her wallet to take out money. Did they see each other? Or were they just two cars passing in the quiet summer evening? Agent Vance looked up at the whiteboard. The line he had written in black marker standing out under the light. 25 minutes. The gap where she vanished. He stood a few steps from the board, his breathing blending with the steady hum of the ceiling vent. 25 minutes in a small town like Blackwood was too long to overlook, yet too short for anyone to remember anything unusual. How many secrets could be hidden in 25 minutes? Finch lied about his residence. The main file under residence recorded that he only moved to Black Pond Lane in December 1974. Yet in his statement, he insisted he was at Black Pond Lane on the evening of 08-19. 35 miles from Blackwood. I was home all that night, Finch answered in the record. A simple sentence, but every piece of evidence contradicted it. Why did he invent that 35-mile distance? Or did he think the farther the distance, the harder the truth would be to trace? Vance reviewed all the pages, each punctuation mark seeming to carve grooves of deception. When he cross-referenced Finch's statement with the choir schedule, with Mrs. Lowell's words, and with the time Ellie left the gas station, he understood that every timeline pointed to one person alone, and the truth sometimes carried the smell of metal, cold enough to cut into skin. In the quiet meeting room, Vance photographed the whiteboard, the phone emitting a dry click that snapped in midair. He sent the full report, the timeline comparison, and the images to Captain William Sterling. The final request was typed clearly. Request search warrant for Charles Finch's residence and seizure of the silver watch. That watch appearing on Finch's wrist in the 1974 morning photo, on his wrist at age 74, and now surfacing again as a piece of evidence demanding to be pulled from the shadows. How many years had it traveled with him? Through how many secrets? When Vance turned off the light and left the meeting room, the last light withdrew from the table, leaving the file lying still like an unpatched crack. The silence behind the door pressed against his back, heavy but familiar. A truth locked away since the summer of 1974 was opening its mouth again. And this time it had nothing left to hide. The metallic click of the iron lock sounded in the cold morning as four police cars stopped in front of Charles Finch's white-painted wooden house. Mist covered the porch, creating a dull veil that hid the marks time had left on every grain of wood. Finch stepped out, 74 years old, moving slowly, eyes unblinking, a faint smile as though he had been waiting for this moment for a very long time. The wind carried the smell of damp earth and the heavy feeling of a house that had hidden something too long. Did he think he would escape after nearly half a century? Vance and Lieutenant O'Connell went straight to the basement as soon as Finch said, "Do what you have to do." They found the basement door secured with an old iron bolt, so cold that touching it felt like metal striking bone. In the darkness, only flashlight beams swept across hanging dust. Under a tarp, they discovered a map of the Maple Creek area, the paper yellowed, corners torn, and two red X's standing out under the light, one at the bridge where the Nova was found, one near the river bank. Why mark both locations? In the wooden desk drawer behind, they found a roll of Kodak 8mm film wrapped in brown paper, the label tremblingly written, "Search 1974. The way he wrote it made Vance think, was it regret or an unfinished confession? When the projector turned on, cold white light hit the damp wall, and blurry images slowly appeared. Maple Creek under thick fog, leaves trembling in the wind, then the gold Chevrolet Nova standing motionless like a soulless object. The film shook and flickered like the breathing of someone trembling. A flashlight beam swept across the car window, and the lens stopped exactly on the glass reflecting the younger face of Raymond Finch. Eyes wide, lips pressed together, expression half fear, half concealment. How long had he stood there? In the background, the car engine died completely. Then Finch's voice whispered softly, "God, please forgive me." The words floated in the basement like smoke that refused to dissipate. Near an old cardboard box, they found a small white fabric scrap stuck with red mud, the smell of earth lingering as though it had just been dug up, even though it had lain there for decades. Vance sealed it, noting a comparison with the fabric of Ellie Hastings' dress at needle and thread tailoring. 2 days later, the Providence lab sent the results. The polyester cotton blend matched exactly the type of fabric Ellie wore in 1974. Vance set the report down on the table, his hand tightening slightly, because each word felt like metal scraping through the air. Had that scrap of fabric waited in Finch's basement all these years for this day? Not stopping there, Vance went to Deputy Rob Hayes, now retired, living quietly among old files and memories no one wanted to touch. The smell of moldy paper and tobacco drifted in the room when Hayes opened the door. When he heard Finch's name, he only nodded faintly and said, "I told you so. From 1974 I suspected him." The words were dry like a dull knife, still sharp enough to leave a mark. Hayes recounted that his superiors at the time had ordered, "Don't touch church people," a short command that buried Ellie Hastings' entire life. How many truths had been blocked by that very sentence? Hayes pulled a thin file from the cabinet, the paper so yellow that a light touch could tear it. Inside was a handwritten note. "Evidence shows male fingerprints. No match in system. Not sent for testing. Possible Pastor Finch contact with evidence." The writing was crooked as if rushed, yet each stroke remained sharp as an accusation. Hayes had kept a small piece of tape cut from the original evidence bag. He said it was his promise to Ellie Hastings. A thin, almost transparent strip of tape, yet heavy as the entire town of Blackwood back then. Why had he kept it for decades? Or had the guilt never left him? A few weeks later, the final test results arrived. The male epithelial cells on the tape matched Charles Finch's DNA profile completely. Vance read the conclusion over and over in the silent room, where the rustle of paper under his hand was clearly audible. The desk lamp cast a cold white light on his face, showing no tremor at all. Everything had closed with irrefutable evidence. Outside in the hallway, the wine through the door crack left a faint howl, reminding of an evening in 1974 that Blackwood would never forget. The truth lay there, needing no raised voice, no explanation, us standing still and forcing everyone to look straight at it. At 7:32 a.m., the final echo of the hymn still trembling on the wooden roof of Trinity Church, Charles Finch set the Bible down on the pulpit. Dim gray light poured through the narrow windows, covering his pale face with an indescribable chill. 7 patrol cars stood motionless in the yard, engines still hot, gasoline fumes drifting in the air like a belated warning. Arrest warrant XO7 to 2.145 had been activated less than an hour earlier. Yet everything had accumulated over nearly 5 decades. When Agent Vance entered from the back door, sawdust drifted gently from the ceiling, and the room fell into absolute silence. Had Finch anticipated every step they would take? The FBI only took over the Hastings case after local leads dead-ended. The file clearly stated the case was elevated to federal level, with the behavioral analysis team from Quantico immediately involved. Dr. Vivian Frost was the first to name Finch, calling him a spiritual predator, a rare type of offender hidden beneath religious robes. She described him as obsessed with morality and punishment, a man who had rationalized his actions through a distorted notion of God's will. In a recorded exchange, Frost said briefly, he believed leaving the church that night was a sign sent down. The words still carried a chilling edge, as though even she did not want to delve deeper into that mind. Why could someone turn faith into a weapon to justify violence? As agents expanded the investigation, they uncovered a thick layer of dust that St. Mark's Chapel had tried to hide for years. FBI files quoted anonymous letters from female parishioners sent between 1970 to 1975, accusing Pastor Finch of inviting private prayer sessions, followed by inappropriate touching. All the letters had been kept secret by the church. Those pages still carried the musty smell, yellowed edges, handwriting trembling as though the writer had feared discovery even then. What had made them stay silent for so long? Or did they know they could not defeat the power he held? Agent David O'Malley was the first to see the repeating pattern. He compared the Hastings case to two other disappearances around Maple Creek, Sarah Jenkins in 1972 and Mary Gibson in 1975. Both were young women, both active in the church, both vanished after choir practice. Their cars were found near the river, doors unlocked, wallets intact. The three disappearance points formed a triangle within an 8-mile radius, and when O'Malley placed the map on the table, the names appeared in an inescapable orbit. Throughout that time, Finch was the only person present in all three communities. Was it really just coincidence? These files carried no smell of blood or cries for help, only gaps, long silences that made the reader wonder. How had those girls experienced their final moments? Did she know she was about to die? The questions remained in the files, like dull blades sharp enough to cut through the timeline but not enough to sever the mystery. The FBI concluded Finch could be a serial killer, shielded by faith and local power. The profiling process brought no satisfaction. It only produced a stark picture where every motive was stripped from the pious exterior. In the final assessment, Frost wrote, "He didn't kill out of ordinary savagery. He saw himself as an instrument of punishment, a short sentence, yet heavy as stone pressing down on the entire case." How long had he stood there before deciding to act? On July 12, 2022, the arrest warrant was signed. Execution site: Trinity Church, a small church on Black Pond Lane, where Finch still preached as though nothing had ever happened. 7 patrol cars were dispatched, approaching from 2 directions. The morning was slow, thin mist clinging to the vehicles, radio static crackling in the cabins, each breath of the tactical team compressed until dry. Agent Vance led the group through the back door, where the smell of rotting wood and summer dampness mixed into something indescribable. Or was that the smell of waiting for 48 years? At 7:32 a.m., exactly as the final hymn ended, the tactical team burst in. The first sound was not screams or struggle, only heavy footsteps echoing on the old wooden floor. Finch stood at the pulpit, not turning, simply setting the Bible down very lightly, as though he had rehearsed this moment for a long time. When Vance approached, light from the stained glass window slanted across Finch's face, revealing a smile so thin it was hard to comprehend. In the report, Vance recorded his final words, "I knew this day would come, but you see, I was only following God's will." The sentence left a silence so long it was suffocating. God's will, or his own? That morning, Black Pond Lane remained peaceful as always, but inside the small church, the chill of the arrest did not fade, as though time had frozen in the moment Finch smiled. No one in the tactical team spoke another word, and the case, that had dragged on for nearly half a century, closed with a silence heavy as stone. Finch was led away in the pale morning light. No resistance, no explanation, no prayer. Only the sound of shoes crunching on gravel, hard and final. The case ends here. But what he left behind will never rest. The metallic clink of handcuffs sounded softly as Charles Finch was brought into the interrogation room at 1:13 a.m., the sound cold and dry, slicing the dim room that smelled of old paper and human breath. He sat down in the chair, the yellowish ceiling light falling exactly on the deep wrinkles of his forehead, casting a long, motionless shadow. The first 12 hours passed heavily. Finch said nothing, only occasionally moving his lips as though swallowing an unfinished prayer. His silence made each second thicker, as though even breathing in the room had to be cautious. As the night deepened, the faint whine of the ceiling fan sounded like a dark omen creeping closer. When the photo of the handkerchief embroidered H was placed in front of him, Finch froze, his gaze strangely sweeping across the edge of the image. He stared for one beat, then lowered his head and whispered, "You don't know what you're doing." The words dropped onto the table like a cold stone, not a warning, not a confession, just an indefinable darkness. What was he implying? Or did he merely want to drag everything into his twisted logic? The ambiguity froze the air in the room, and the metallic damp smell from the cuffs grew sharper under the light. At midnight, Agent Vance leaned close to the table, his voice low. "If you truly believe in God, tell me where she is." Finch looked up, the corners of his mouth curling into an emotionless smile. He spoke slowly, each word sinking into the thick air, "Where the river splits in two." Then he added, "Where God washes away sin, the water carries everything away." That girl was cleansed too. The answer gave no clear directions, but sounded like a discord in him, forcing the listener to wonder, was he confessing or merely delirious, or was it just a shadow of the truth? Agent Vance opened the map of Maple Creek, circling the confluence near Old Crawford Road. The desk lamplight fell on the paper, revealing a faint trembling pencil line as he drew the circle. The room suddenly smelled strongly of ink and paper dust, as though everything was waiting for something to be turned over. By morning, the forensics team and dive team were mobilized to the designated spot. The sky was lead gray, cold mist rising from the river like a veil over the eyes of those standing on the bank. They brought Finch along. His steps were slow across the dew-soaked grass, each footfall sounding as though he were deliberately crushing whatever remained. He stood before the low mound and pointed. Right there, the ground-penetrating radar hummed steadily, a soft but cold sound that tore through the earth. The screen showed an anomaly about 3 feet deep. Beneath it was a small skeletal structure, possibly human. The forensics team began digging, each layer of black soil turned up, the musty smell thick in their faces. Then white bones gradually emerged, cold and sharp under the dim light, as though they had waited for this moment for decades. A cracked, leather shoe from the 1970s was lifted first, the peeling leather still bearing the marks of time. Next, a round metal button with white thread attached rested in the technician's palm. He asked quietly, "Did she know she was about to die?" The technician confirmed, "Female remains, age approximately 18 to 20. The words rang out, starkly, without a trace of emotion. Yet everyone present heard in them a silent, indescribable echo. Finch stood a few meters away, eyes closed, lips moving faintly as though performing a twisted ritual. "Now she rests in peace." His words dissolved into the wine through the trees, dry and sharp as it scraped across the bones still visible in the pit. Why did he see this as peace when Agent Vance questioned him on sight? Finch said, "She was already cleansed. I only sent her on the water before I could go back." He spoke as though it were a ritual, not the cruel act of stealing a young girl's life. His words made Vance stand still for a moment, as though gripped by an invisible chill. Those half-spoken sentences were more terrifying than a clear confession, because they carried no moral boundary. They were only darkness. Agent Vance ordered Finch removed from the scene. As he was led away, Finch looked back at the mound, his eyes showing neither fear nor remorse, only an empty stillness. He whispered, "Between the two waters, she no longer suffers. The final words slid through the cold air like deep night, then sank into the sound of footsteps on wet earth. The case reached its conclusion not with screams, but with a thick, heavy silence. And sometimes, that very silence, the thing that never fades away. A week after the first bones were unearthed, the broken metal watch was placed on the cold examination table, its cracked glass clouded as though it still held the victim's final moment. A faint chemical smell rose, mixing with the lingering river mud on the evidence, creating an indescribable damp thickness. The technician's pen tapped unevenly against the steel table, sounding dry and hollow in the dead quiet space. Then, the State Forensics Bureau report was opened, each page rustling as if brushing against something no one had dared face for decades. In that moment, the truth began to take shape slowly, like mud receding from a body that had lain too long in the earth. Dr. Emily Carter, the forensic pathologist, announced the DNA results in a flat, emotionless voice. The femur and molar match 999% with the genetic profile of Martha Hastings, the victim's mother. The sentence that followed, "It really is Eleanor Caldwell," cut through the air like a cold blade, putting an end to every fragile hope that remained. How long had he stood there before burying her? The question drifted silently through the minds of everyone present, but no one spoke it aloud. Beside the skeleton, a broken Royal Crown watch from 1973 was found near the wrist bones, the gray-silver metal bent as if crushed by a powerful force. The hairs were caught in the clasp, one brown matching Ellie Hastings' DNA, the other silver-white carrying Charles Finch's Y chromosome. The smell of rust and damp mud rose as they separated the samples, each movement slow, as if afraid of shattering the last traces of the girl. Did he ever think he would get away with it forever? The reconstruction report was read in a mechanical, monotone. Female, age 18 to 20, blunt force trauma to the back of the skull, likely from a gun butt or wooden club. Mud from the river was present in the lungs and chest cavity, indicating the victim was still breathing when buried. Time of death: 1 to 2 hours after the injury, due to mechanical asphyxiation. Those cold, clinical lines did not capture the full truth, yet they laid bare the horror with absolute precision. She had woken up in thick darkness, mud against her face, her breath slowly crushed out. When she opened her eyes, did she have time to realize where she was? Dr. Carter added, her voice lower but no softer. Scratches on the inner soil layer show she regained consciousness and tried to claw her way out before she stopped breathing. She was buried shallow, only 3 feet. If anyone had searched in the first 2 days, they could have found her. The words hung in the room like a heavy blade, unsure where to fall. 28 years. Who still remembers that cry for help? The silence stretched so long that the hum of the air conditioner blowing cold air became clearly audible. Each detail from the report was pieced together, fragments fitting like a reconstruction of Eleanor Caldwell's final moments. The blow to the head that knocked her unconscious, her body dragged across the damp earth, face pressed into river, mud, a shallow grave hastily filled, and then total darkness closing in. Soil crept into her mouth, into her lungs. River mud mixed with her weakening breath. At that moment, what did she still hear? Or was there only the frantic beating of her own heart before it faded completely? In the lab, the white neon light fell on the bones, casting a sharp, cold glow that felt as though touching it would draw away the last trace of warmth left from the past. The final report was printed, the printer whining softly as each sheet slid out with the familiar, merciless chill of justice arrived too late. The case status was updated to homicide. No climax, no screams, just a smooth line of text, yet heavy. enough to drown an entire life in the guilty silence of the one who caused it. Everything ended on paper, yet the smell of damp mud from long ago seemed never to leave the room. And sometimes, the truth lives longer than anybody ever could. In November 2022, when the courtroom door slammed shut behind them, the last sound, lingering in the air, was the faint clink of the chains on Charles Finch's wrists. The smell of old wood from the spectator benches mixed with the cold blast of air conditioning, turning the entire room as quiet as a lighted crypt. On the table, the projector remote still glowed red, and the unfinished testimony of an elderly witness still hung in everyone's mind. That night, what had he heard? Finch's trial took place in Cumberland County, nearly half a century after Eleanor Caldwell vanished. Finch sat in his orange prison jumpsuit, posture straight, as calm as though none of this concerned him. The cold light only deepened the emptiness around where he sat. Prosecutor Sarah Jenkins rose first, her voice sharp as a blade. Eleanor Caldwell had not run away, had not left home, had not hidden from life. She was murdered 48 years ago, and every piece of evidence, from DNA to witnesses to Finch's vague confessions, pointed in one direction only. Why was he still trying to deny it now? The screen lit up, showing two hairs, one brown, one silver entwined on the watch chain, a small but chilling piece of evidence. Then came the old Polaroid, Finch standing beside the Nova, wearing that exact silver watch. The glare on the metal seemed to tell the story that had been hidden for nearly half a century. Next, the 8mm film played, freezing the air in the courtroom instantly. A flashlight beam swept across the dusty car in the dark basement, and Finch's voice whispered, trembling but clear, "God, please forgive me." A silence fell, so long that everyone could hear each person's breathing. So, what had he done that night to whisper those words? Defense attorney Andrew Stone rose, trying to sway the jury by arguing that all the evidence was too old, possibly contaminated, and that Finch had cooperated, had led police to the body. But Prosecutor Jenkins shattered that shield with a single cold sentence. Finch only wanted control, then over the moment he was caught. The words landed heavily, like stone. Or was it merely the final desperate effort of a man clinging to power until his last breath? Former Deputy Rob Hayes was called to the stand. His voice was hoarse with age, but his words cut like something pulled from an old wound. "I suspected him in 1974, but I was told, 'Don't touch church people.'" The echo of that sentence carried the stale dampness of files, locked away for nearly half a century, 28 years, who still remembers. Finch did not look up, did not react, only blinked slowly as though the story belonged to someone else. When Finch took the stand himself, he spoke in a steady, unhurried voice, without tremor or hesitation. He had not killed anyone, he insisted. He had only saved her from sin and brought her to God. In the freezing courtroom, the words rang out like a poisonous wind blowing through an abandoned graveyard. Did she know she was about to die? Jenkins stepped forward, her eyes piercing straight through Finch's feigned calm. "You call knocking out and burying alive a 19-year-old girl sacred?" The room held its breath. Finch closed his eyes slowly, as though listening to a distant voice only he could hear. "God spoke to me that night." How long had he stood there before deciding to obey the voice only he believed in? The jury retired to deliberate. The door closed behind them, leaving a thick void where every eye turned to the wall clock, its second hand ticking like footsteps approaching the final verdict. 3 hours passed, slow as 3 decades. In that silence, no one spoke, but everyone understood. The truth was too clear. It only waited to be named. When they returned, everyone stood. The jury foreman held a white sheet of paper, his hand trembling slightly. He read slowly, each word deliberate, as if ensuring no syllable escaped justice's severity. Guilty of murder in the first degree. Defendant Charles Finch guilty. Or was it merely a shadow finally falling behind his life? Finch did not cry, did not rage, did not complain. He simply looked straight ahead, as though at last everything had returned to its proper place, the place where darkness had swallowed a young girl nearly half a century earlier. The courtroom gradually emptied of the echo of the verdict. I only remember the cold light on the silver watch in the Polaroid, silent as the only thing that had never lied, and Finch's silence, after everything, was more terrifying than any confession he had ever uttered. The judge's gavel struck like a cold, dry slash across the end of a file that had stretched 48 years. The courtroom door vibrated slightly, followed by the smell of old wood stirred by the clinking chains on Charles Finch's wrists. A weak streak of sunlight slipped through the high window, falling exactly on the edge of the table where the sentence was laid down. And in that instant, Finch bowed his head slightly, lips moving in words no one could hear. Who was he speaking to in that thick silence? The judge sentenced him to life without parole at Penobscot State Prison, Maine. The words fell heavily, like a stone pushing back every defense Finch had ever tried to build. Finch closed his eyes, eyelids trembling briefly before sealing shut, as though he wanted to gather the last light before stepping into the rest of his life without dawn. He prayed, lips moving slowly, impossible to tell whether it was repentance or continued clinging to the twisted faith he had always used to cover his crimes. Did she know she was about to die? Everyone avoided looking at his face, hearing only the rough breathing rising and falling, like wind sweeping through the door of an abandoned chapel. As the officers led him away, Finch turned to look at Agent Vance and Prosecutor Jenkins, his eyes showing neither hatred nor pleading, only a strange calm, as though he were the one escorting them. I gave her back to you. You wanted justice. I gave you justice. I just went ahead one step. The rest is God's work. His words echoed down the long hallway, mingling with the sound of shoes on tile and the lingering sharp smell of disinfectant from the morning. How long had he stood there before, confidently speaking those words as though he held the final judgment? When Finch disappeared, Agent Vance sat down, opened his notebook. The first page was blank except for the ink he was now writing. Case number 74 Hastings, closed after 48 years. Homicide confirmed. Suspect convicted. Victim identified. The letters stood sharp, each stroke like the final notches sealing a journey buried in dust for nearly half a century. Or was it merely a shadow slowly stepping out of the light? Vance set the pen down, exhaled slowly, his breath carrying the smell of old paper and the cold metal of the chair he sat in. He looked out the office window, where the late afternoon light swept across the trees toward Maple Creek. That stream still flowed, still carried the old color of red mud that had hidden Eleanor Caldwell for decades. In that brief moment, Vance seemed to see again the 19-year-old girl who had been forgotten, mentioned only in old news reports as missing, with no one knowing how silently she had lain beneath that soil. 48 years, who still remembers. Time's dust had covered her name, but today the file had changed its wording, and every line spoke what should have been acknowledged long ago. She was a murder victim, not someone who ran away or hid from anyone. In that room, every movement slowed. The golden light fell on the corner of the table where the file was reassembled, its cover worn, edges curled by time. The faint smell of moldy paper mingled with the soft rattle of wine against the window pane, making the air heavy as though the room itself understood something had finally closed after nearly half a century. Vance still gazed at Maple Creek, eyes narrowed slightly, as though trying to find in the thin mist the image of Eleanor called, well, rising from the cold earth to reclaim the place justice owed her. Or was she only an echo lost in the flowing water? When Eleanor's story is returned to its rightful place, it becomes a chilling reminder of justice delayed by prejudice and blind faith in religious authority. Without the persistence of those who came later, would that file have remained motionless in a metal cabinet for another 10 years? Finch was protected all that time simply because of the religious robe the community draped over him. She had been silent for years in the earth, but the truth did not die with her. It only waited for the right day to rise from the red mud and speak what had to be spoken. The light outside gradually withdrew from the window frame, leaving the room in dim gray. Vance closed the notebook with a small, dry sound final. The case was closed. Justice, though late, had finally reached the name of a girl the world once forgot, and the silence that remained upward was so cold that no one wanted to break it. If you found this story meaningful and would like to hear more cases told with deep analysis, please leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Your support is the motivation for me to continue bringing you true stories, life lessons, and journeys in search of justice. Thank you for listening to the very end, and I'll see you in the next cases.